Well, it's a day. I'm pleased. Hey, thanks, Luke. That's very appreciated. Luke, coming in hard on this community, and honestly, we are all the better for it. Really appreciated there. And hi, and it's Requiem and Plucky Heroes here as well. How's everyone doing? I am off after today for a long weekend, and I am not going to complain about that. I could sure use the long weekend, and I will enjoy it thoroughly. I haven't really been taking any time this year, and I really should be. So I'm making sure that I take a bit of time, and that will help improve my overall state. And literally 1 minute before my face appeared on your screens, I got a phone call from my mother, and that's always a good thing to have. Shot knocked you for 6. Yeah, the shot knocked me out for a little bit too. I will take that knockout any damn day. That is something that I will do at any point. It was so worth it to get that shot, and I will defend that because I felt kind of lousy for a day. I still went to work, but I sort of was sluggish and I ached. It felt like I had the flu, even though I didn't have the symptoms of the flu. But yeah, and I can't wait to do it again. Unfortunately, my second dose is scheduled for shortly before my birthday in August. But I'm hoping that because the vaccination rollout is going so well, I may be able to get it a bit earlier. Oh, that's fine. I don't mind being stuck. Pukajutsu, it is always good to see you. I hope that you had a good stream. I hope that you rode very hard, you and your ponies, because they always deserve to ride hard at all times. Hey, it's Rock Pants! Man, I've got such cool people coming to hang out, and like that just shows how lucky I am. And it makes me feel a little badly about the thing that I was asked to talk about at the very top of this stream, which is, I'm gonna see if I can pull it up right here so that I can get the... Can't make it myself, but you opened a clinic today with some serious cases of playing TTRPG at an actual table-itis. So the Crosshair was suggesting long-distance tabletop role-playing as a topic. You're the artist, now you're chapped. You're watching on your phone from the lobby of a doctor's office. Traydog, that's an amazing thing to do. The fact that like, you can just look at it on a phone and be like, oh, there you go. I also wonder whether your internet is going to be better on your phone from your doctor's office than from your actual home. Not to pour salt in that wound, but I do hope that that gets resolved really soon. It's common to feel sick the day after my second dose. Yeah, I figure, and I will make sure that I take that into account and may just take a day off if I need to afterwards. But here's the deal about long-distance tabletop role-playing. I think that the ability for you to be able to engage in a hobby as fulfilling and as creative and as thrilling as role-playing with people from around the globe is fantastic. I think that you can engage in a lot of absolutely wonderful storytelling by doing that, by reaching out, and the fact that now you can make it easier than ever by using tools such as Roll20 or Zoom, Skype, Discord, or any of the other video conferencing tools that are available to you can really make things different for that. And I hate it. I did long-distance role-playing for quite some time, for about 2 years, while I was working in another country. And we wanted to keep RPGClinic going, although at the time it wasn't RPGClinic. At the time it was just on my personal Twitch channel. But we wanted to keep playing even though I was gone, and I still credit that with, in large part, to making sure that I remained as close as I am to my fellow players at RPGClinic. I'm not saying that I wouldn't be if we hadn't been playing, but it certainly did help. It helped that also we had a regular time, that every Sunday evening, we were going to be getting together and playing, which was just a wonderful thing to do. But, and there is going to be a but here, and it is not the one that I'm sitting upon. I feel that there is a distinct disadvantage which we overlook when it comes to role-playing online in real time. Now, there's plenty of role-playing that's done that's chat-based or forum-based, and these don't have the same kind of issues that I'm talking about here. It's lag. The idea that you're playing with somebody else and interacting with them and going off their body language and all of that is true if you're in person with them. And if you're not getting that. And I realize that a lot of people may not have that opportunity, or may have not had that opportunity with their gaming group to be in the same location and being able to read somebody's physical cues and their energy. And I know that sounds kind of hippy-dippy to say, but it is an actual thing. Like, you can, if you are in somebody's presence, they give off so many subconscious cues that you can pick up on it, and then you can kind of riff on them and you can go back and forth. And you miss that if you're online, because all you can see is a 2D image that's projected on a screen from a camera that is often not a very great camera to begin with. Plus, lighting isn't necessarily all that great, all of that stuff too. Took a small break from Mass Effect Legendary. I might pull the trigger on MALE today, on Melee today. I haven't yet, and I'm wondering whether I want to. I'm wondering whether I want to wait for it to come down in price. I'm not sure. But here's the thing, that it isn't even just about missing on those cues. It's also about the fact that when you are talking online with somebody, there is an amount of lag that is introduced. By the time I finish speaking this sentence, there will be a period of time where my voice will be captured by my computer, my image will be captured by my camera, sent to my computer, they'll be transcoded, sent out towards Twitch's servers, and then Twitch's servers will bounce that signal on to one of you. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, then you're not live anyway, so it doesn't matter. But there is a period of time that all that takes, and it is very fast, and it's getting faster all the time, but it is not instantaneous. And the issue with that is that if you are playing with somebody else and you are getting into a conversation with them, you'll find that in these kinds of games, people will talk over each other a little bit more. People will wait and anticipate and fail to get that anticipation across, and it's because of that lag. And it means that conversations don't flow as naturally. It means that emotions don't come as easily. It means that you are essentially giving yourself a disadvantage. Now, is it better to play with a disadvantage than not play at all? Most of the time, yes. But it is something that has really put a cramp on the games that I've played recently, just because it is so crucial for me to be able to get that kind of narrative across to somebody else and receive from them, and that little bit of lag just interrupts the experience enough that it can make it difficult to really engage on the same level. Is this a problem of, well, I'm doing this at the top of my game with people who are at the top of their games, and we are trained to react to each other in terms of performance? It might be, and I'm definitely not saying that we shouldn't do it at all. After all, we do it and will continue to do it for as long as it is necessary for us to remain apart. But it is unfortunately an issue that we've been struggling with, and it is something that, therefore, I do want to encourage you to think about whether or not you're taking lag into account when you're playing. Obviously, these days during the pandemic, it is safest to remain isolated and to play with other people while isolated. But as our planet starts its process of crawling out, and remember that those of us who are lucky enough to live in privileged nations may be getting access to our doses sooner than those who are not. And those of us who are even living in privileged nations may not have the same privilege as other nations. Bear in mind that playing online has a lot of convenience, but you are giving stuff up for it. So in the future, if you're going to go on and you're going to play with your friends in that way, just be a little bit careful that you aren't saying, well, we might as well play online, it's easiest. Roll20 gives us the tools that we need to use maps and stuff, so why would we want to stay in person? You're going to miss that thing, that ineffable quality. That small delay can have larger ramifications than you think. So we do actually have some comments coming in. I'm going to save this because I'm going to send this on. I got to tell the feature.chat people about this, but now I'm actually taking evidence. So let's have a look at some comments that are coming in here. Get out of here, come on. So we have NFL who says, new here, about as far from a pro TTRPG as you can get, and we've definitely had that problem since moving our game onto Skype. Yeah, I don't think you have to be a pro to do it, and I hesitate to use the word pro in that, you know, like, I don't want to start being like, oh, I'm a professional, but, you know, like, storytelling is actually my job at this point. For all of us, the process of delivering stories is our job. We all take different parts in it. So I guess we could be considered professionals in that way. But yeah, I did use the word ineffable, Kung Fu Fenders. I mean, Requiem makes an excellent point. You don't get the joy of sharing a couple of pizzas when you play online. This is true. It is an unfortunate reality of what we're doing, that we can't necessarily share snacks. Although, of course, these days it's getting harder and harder for us to necessarily, you know, share anything, let alone snacks. But also, am I on a close-up? I guess my zoom is a little too aggressive here. Let's see if I can cut it out. Oh, and there's my screen. I had to change the way the screen was oriented at one point, so we'll see if no, we won't be able to make that work. Haha! All right, well, we'll zoom in. It's fine. It'll work. Random quick changes to how things are going, but we'll just crop that out. It'll be okay. You see nothing. There we go. All right. Yeah, and it's good to see you. It's good to see anybody who's new around here. We really do appreciate it. That is one aggressive zoom. Yeah, it is. Cameras are a pain because I have to use them for work at the same time as I'm using them for this. And they of course change with the times and all of that. So. Yeah. At any rate, we were going to talk today. You got Tabletop Simulator earlier, so that's cool. I haven't actually used Tabletop Simulator for anything except role-playing, and I use it a bit to help somebody test a game that they were working on, and I was surprisingly pleased by how it went. I thought that it was going to be janky, but there was some very legitimate benefits to using Tabletop Simulator. There was automations that were in place, and you still got the sort of thrill of throwing a die, so handy for that. But really enjoy running Exalted and Tabletop Simulator during the pandemic. So there are a lot of things that you can do in order to make that really cool. I mean, I suppose I could just slap on a VR headset and really dive in, but so the main thing you want to play is Candyland, since you never got to play it as a kid. Luke, if you want to play Candyland, roll a die, have somebody else roll a die, and whoever has the higher roll wins. That's Candyland. Unfortunately, that's the extent of the game. It is purely luck-based. There is no strategy at all, other than can you recognize a color, which ends up not being a terrific challenge for anybody past a certain point. You make custom dice for your players. See, that's cool. I'm going to have a look at that. And I also, because I am lucky enough that I have a VR headset that I could use, I should have a look at it too. Candy Whimsy. I mean, Candy Whimsy, you can look at a picture of the board while you're rolling a die, I guess. Media and RPGs. This was something that was brought up. By the way, if you are new here, at any point, if you have a comment or a question that you want to throw out, please do. We kind of just shift around topics all the time around here. I'm just given topics so that I have something to riff on while we're waiting for other things. Should you post your custom dice? Go ahead. Go nuts. So recently we've had a couple of big announcements. We have announcements that the World of Darkness is being adapted for television by the showrunner for Shadow and Bone. And this is interesting. And I'm not certain in the end. Okay, first of all, I should point out I should point out in the interest of just full disclosure, I have an extremely vague link with the showrunner of Shadow and Bone, who is working on this. He and I had met and discussed things in the past on an internet forum in which we were both a part of for many years. Although we've never met in real life, we don't, he doesn't know my real name. We're not like friends. But I do have that, so I'm just saying that in the interest of full disclosure. The thing is that when the World of Darkness was previously adapted for television, it was for a show called Kindred the Embraced, and there's a reason why people sometimes call this Kindred the Embarrassed. It wasn't great, but fantasy is starting to become more and more accepted, especially urban fantasy or modern fantasy, which are starting to become a more kind of accepted genre. But there's an interesting flaw to all of this that I'm going to be pointing out soon, because it's also based on the other one that is Scion. Scion has been announced for television in a deal made through Onyx Path, and this is through Jenkins and Tate Entertainment. Do we have names attached to this one? No, we don't have names attached to it. We just have the Jenkins and Tate Entertainment is they're doing the development deal. So they are on a path for a live action TV series based on the Scion role-playing game. Now, one of the things that I have pointed out a few times on Clinic Hours in the past, and that I'll continue harping on, is that role-playing is a type of storytelling, and as a type of storytelling, it has its own unique quibbles and rules and boundaries and strengths and weaknesses. Television, novels, comic books, movies, all of these things have different ways in which they tell stories and different advantages and disadvantages. A development deal is still a deal, Kung Fu Fenris. I believe I called it a development deal. So it is a development deal. They are developing it, and we'll see if anything comes out of it. We haven't had an announcement as to, anything beyond that. So yeah, the Percy Jackson books are better than the movies. So here's the thing. Media isn't necessarily created with the thought of transmedia, and transmedia being taking one story and putting it in other media. Now, there are people at this point, transmedia as a term is also slowly becoming media about trans experiences in terms of those who are trans. But we're not focusing on that today. We're focusing specifically on the idea of moving a story from one to another, to another, to another. And here's the thing. It is absolutely possible for these things to do well. I guarantee you that all hope is not lost, because there have been plenty of instances of transmedia that have worked out phenomenally. There are books that I can say, and there are movies, and there will be people who will say that they prefer the movie over the books. And this has happened a lot. I personally feel like there's examples that I can pull out of anything. I mean, first of all, Jurassic Park, the book, was written knowing that it will eventually become a movie. And yet many changes were made to the book for the movie for the better. Forrest Gump, if you've ever read the book Forrest Gump, Forrest is a much more unlikable character than when they put him in the film. The Lord of the Rings makes a way better film trilogy than it does a book trilogy at this point. And I know that can be sacrilege to hear, but they make a bunch of pacing changes to make that story fit better for the films. They take out a lot, they change some things. Yeah, I said it, and I'll say it again. Lord of the Rings, the 3 films, are better than the books. They are more entertaining. They are better paced. They're still not perfect, believe it or not. They even by today's standards, they could learn a lot, but they have created something that is better than the sum of its parts. You might as well attack the Iliad or the Epic of Gilgamesh. See, here's the thing. I believe that it's very important for us to learn from the past. I believe that it is very wrong for us to remain bound by the past. And to say that The Lord of the Rings is an important trilogy is absolutely true for fantasy authors everywhere and for the fantasy genre as a whole. But that doesn't make it as good as what can be coming out these days. Hobbit is better than the movie. I don't even like acknowledging that the Hobbit films exist. But there's a reason why, for instance, people play D&D 5th edition and fewer people play D&D 1st edition, because we've learned since then. We have grown the medium. And the same thing happens with novels, and the same thing happens with films. And the same things happen with storytelling, because we can get better at things. We can learn from the past and grow. And Tolkien's writing style is dull. And there are people who really enjoy his writing style, absolutely. But his writing style is not designed for today's audience. It absolutely is not. It is plotting. It is far too descriptive. It meanders. It goes elsewhere. There are parts of that book which are so poorly paced. There's a reason why Tom Bombadil doesn't show up in the films, right? There's a reason why Arwen is actually the one who carries Frodo off after he was stabbed by a Morgul blade. It is, but here's the thing. You are allowed to enjoy things that are older. You're also allowed to enjoy things that most other people don't enjoy. This is one of the great things about being, about the human experience, is you can do these things. You can enjoy it. And if you say, Kung Fu Fenders, that it's like literary archaeology, like it's going to a museum, it is absolutely true. And there are reasons why we should study the past. There's a reason why we still study Shakespeare. So many stories today owe a lot to the Bard. And we still put on Shakespearean plays because we enjoy learning about the history. And also, theater as a medium is one of those things where you can take a look at a script and it can be interpreted in so many different ways that we still haven't even wrung out every bit of story that we can get from Shakespeare. That's kind of the magic of theater. And there's value to it, but I'm also not going to pretend that A Midsummer Night's Dream is going to bring in the same amount of bucks as Percy Jackson, even, right? Even though that film sucked, right? It is the reality of the situation that we just get better at things. And one of the problems when it comes to taking RPGs and moving them to other media is that they were not designed to be storytelling experiences alone. They were designed to be added upon and improved upon, but they were also designed to help a group of people create their own story. One of the things that I will point out about the World of Darkness is that it is full of flawed characters, which is what you want for a story, but it is also full of flaws which are designed to be so obvious that the players overcome it almost immediately. Things like isolationist tendencies, things like bigotry, things like dysfunction. These things are present in spades, and the only reason why they work in the context of a role-playing game is because it works because we say it works. And then we've created a system that is flawed so that the players can come in and be paragons of how it is not flawed. And characters that are too awful to have as characters on the screen. I mean, yes, right? Heaven help us if Zizek ever makes it onto screen. But the other thing that I'll point out is that the World of Darkness started many years ago during another time when there were other priorities at stake, when there was not as much awareness as we have now about various social issues, and that were, in some ways, written by people who were more interested in enacting their fantasy than they were about storytelling for a wide audience. The edgy 90s. Please don't hop on your hands, Pukajutsu. If there's any place where I want your hands, it's here. I want your hands all over this thing. Please type it. Type it away. Type. The World of Darkness lays some claim to being one of the role-playing games that was more open and more accepting and more about other people being able to come in and be themselves. And yet the books don't support that in a lot of ways. We've even had recent examples of how there have been just some complete boneheaded moves made by people writing official material for the World of Darkness, which have conclusively proven that they have not yet grasped what it means to be diverse. Now, I'm going to throw up something here just as a cover my ass and a cover everyone else's ass disclaimer, which is there is no piece of any kind of content that you can receive that does not have its own biases. The perfect media does not exist. There will always be troublesome things that you can find, especially if you look hard enough, even troublesome things that were never intended, or troublesome things that which are more brought to light after the fact because they were never even in consideration beforehand. I am not saying that the World of Darkness is a terrible thing and that no one should ever play it, nor am I saying that if you enjoy the World of Darkness, then clearly you are subject to the same amounts of incorrectness that are found. But, yeah, they being completely new people, absolutely. But that is something that we have to take into account, that as long as we consume our media mindfully, then we're at least ahead of the game. We're doing a bit better than we were before. Right, so I'm actually going to post this because I think it's important for us to read it, because this is kind of what I was building towards. I figured this might be what Pukajutsu was talking about, so let's throw it up there in all of its glory. In a Variety article, one of the co-producers said that the World of Darkness story universe is deliberately and unapologetically inclusive and diverse. It has always made a point of including equal-gendered characters, protagonists and antagonists of every race, and representation of all creeds, bringing a female and diverse audience to gaming like nothing prior. Its games and fandoms are a place where women, people of color, and the LGBTQI community feel welcome, and we are very proud to bring these stories to life. This statement is disingenuous at best. I don't necessarily go as hard as Pukajutsu's following comment, which is lying, liar with a side of lies, because there are kernels of truth to this, but that's all they are, kernels of truth. It obscures a lot of the mistakes that the World of Darkness has made, and a lot of mistakes that was made accidentally and deliberately. Because let's face it, the World of Darkness splats are often based on stereotypes, And it's very hard for them to let go of these stereotypes because they form a large core of what makes these games popular to an audience. So, Pook, I would say that no role-playing game is that yet. None that I've encountered can truly say that they are not only, without problems, but also deliberately reaches out to be inclusive. Because that's kind of where we're at here, and I'm saying this not to criticize role-playing, but to say that is the reality. I just believe that it is incorrect for people to qualify the World of Darkness as woke, when it is not woke. It is trying to become more woke, but it ain't there yet, and it may never get there. It is true. I will say that it is true that the World of Darkness did appeal to a much more different audience than, say, Dungeons and Dragons did, and reached out to them first, or reached out to them before D&D did, at any rate. That is true, but that doesn't mean that the source material isn't rife with its own issues and problems. Issues and problems that will have to be addressed by anyone choosing to adapt the World of Darkness into another media, because it will be a lot harder to hide behind that sort of thing on TV. I'm also going to make sure that I throw this out there. I am a cisgendered heterosexual white male. So when I say that, when I'm trying to defend it, I'm not really defending it. I am mentioning that there are kernels of truth to what they're saying here. I should point out that I'm not really the person with the final definitive expert opinion on all this. So just be careful about that. Because what Pukajutsu is saying is actually also correct, right? As someone who is gay and gray ace, I've definitely felt more at home in World of Darkness communities. I will say it did pull me in, but even as I learned, I don't know if it grew with me. I think that it has grown in fits and starts, and it is now attempting to make a huge overhaul. But I don't think the overhaul has happened yet. I want to see when that happens. Specifically, the proof for me is going to be Werewolf 5th edition, because Werewolf has a lot of its themes at its core of saving the planet and of, trying to get a diverse group of people to work together. But at the same time, it is rooted in so many stereotypes, and even includes, perhaps unintentionally, straight up racial slurs as part of its game mechanic name. That, I'm so gray. I mean, gay and gray ace is all sorts of cool, but the reality is that they're trying to, but it is unfortunate and inappropriate for them to come out and say, look how woke we are, because they've got a long way to go. Because as much as they've been able to reach out to communities, they've also done a lot to hurt those communities, and they're trying, and hopefully they'll get there. But look, it took D&D right up until 5th edition to straight up, if I remember correctly, I think it was right up until 5th edition to straight up say, you can play whatever character you want, male, female, somewhere in between, somewhere other than male or female. Gender can matter, gender cannot matter. It doesn't matter who you love, doesn't matter whatever. 5th edition was when they started putting that in there. And then it took them another few years before they started realizing, like, maybe we shouldn't be tying people's intelligence or wisdom to their race. So we're only getting there now. So as much as I'm bringing the World of Darkness to task, I don't think many games have done a whole lot better, because some games have ignored the issue, and some games are doing their best to bring marginalized people to light, but in doing so are also unapologetically and correctly, I might add, doing so in such a way that it essentially is not creating a diverse game, but instead creating a game that focuses on other cultures instead. There's been a fantastic looking Kickstarter that has come out recently called Into the Motherlands, which funded in 90 minutes has already raised over 175,000 Canadian, which is very, very cool. But based on what I've looked at in this, it is not a game that is designed to tell stories for everyone. It is an Afrocentric, or specifically an Afrofuturist tabletop role-playing game. So it isn't meant to be telling stories for everyone. It's meant to be telling specifically Afrofuturist stories. So that's kind of where we're at there. I'll let Pukajitsu talk about gray when it comes to asexuality or aromantic situations and the like. So the perfect game does not exist in that form. Now, Into the Motherlands seems like an amazing game to tell Afrofuturist stories, but like I'll also point out that unfortunately I don't think we're ever going to be able to play it on RPGClinic in its current form, because it isn't really our place to tell Afrofuturist stories, and I don't know whether we'd be able to do it justice. So there's that as well, which is too bad because the game looks pretty cool. So we'll see, but any adaptation of these sorts of things are going to have to take that into account. But they do have the ability to script themselves and therefore be able to be subject to more editing. So that's why I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to be able to do with the World of Darkness and with Scion. But they have to get over not just the troublesome aspects of those games, but also be able to move past the base part of those games, which is essentially to create a universe in which the players know better than everyone. So there is that for us to take into account. Here, let's call up a couple of other questions because some interesting ones came in. So how well does Exalted handle these issues, in my opinion? Third edition is certainly better than first and second in those respects, especially when it came to things like the lunar bond. I think that the concept that there is a type of Exalted that were essentially created to be the consorts, mates, and advisors for another Exalted sort of sat uneasily with me to begin with. But when they specifically are like, you know what, the bond kind of exists, but it also doesn't, and now different people feel differently about it, means that now we can tell that story going forward a little bit better. Exalted is very deliberately a mixture between Eastern and Western mythologies and doesn't make huge attempts to plaster itself with the look and feel of any one particular culture. This is in stark relief to, say, Legend of the Five Rings, which prides itself on being based in Japanese culture and folklore, even though it borrows elements from other countries. It really is a Japan-focused game, which is another reason why that will most likely not be a game that we'll be able to stream. Exalted avoids this by first presenting a much larger world, a much more vast world, but also not kind of pulling upon tropes that are seen in cultural media here and then just lifting them and putting them straight in to something else. As Kung Fu Fenris has said, it's got a good angle because it's not really working from a real world perspective. There were, like, at one point a really ham-fisted attempt to sort of claim that the World of Darkness's predecessor was creation and that the Age of Sorrows was before the World of Darkness, but they've kind of abandoned that, and as well they should. But Exalted isn't perfect. There are still elements of the game which can be difficult for some people to handle. One of the things that we have specifically mentioned in the past and that we have in our current campaign is the issue of slavery. Slavery is a fraught topic, and rightly so. It has affected and continues to affect people to this day. A large number of people, everyone, in fact, to certain degrees, and it is a part of creation. Now, we at one point wanted to sort of realize that we can't sanitize the world. We can't say that nothing bad ever happens in this world, that there isn't anything that's horrific that ever occurs in creation, because then what is there that removes the drama, that removes the fight. And at the same time, we also were like, this is a deal. This is a serious topic that can make people very uncomfortable. and we don't necessarily feel as equipped as others to be able to talk about it. So we kind of made the decision that it existed to a certain degree in the world, but that we wouldn't bring it front and center, because we didn't want to make it a game about slavery, and we also didn't want to forgive anybody who was reflected to slavery. So it is a tricky balance, shall we say, but we also didn't want to have the 3 white players solve slavery for the world. This is a little different if you're playing at home with your friends, because what you do isn't meant to be consumed by anybody else. But we are playing for an audience. We are playing and putting our shows out there. So we are aware that what we do is seen and therefore is experienced differently. So we didn't necessarily want to just kind of like fully go for it in all of those ways. So it's a bit of a different challenge. And that's, again, this is taking a role-playing game and putting it into another media. We have an audience. Role-playing games weren't designed with audiences in mind, but it does change our gameplay. It doesn't change it fundamentally, but it does change it. And we are aware of it. We do have to remain aware of it as we move forward. Requiem pointing out that Exalted is a kind of mix between Chinese and Roman culture to some extent. Not a perfect cross, but there are some flavors in there, is true. And there are elements of that, but it's more than just China and Italy or Chinese and Roman or whatever. It's borrowing from a lot of different sources. So in that way, it's trying to avoid appearing as one or the other. So, also, Plucky Hero. Yeah, at some point you cannot avoid influences. No, you cannot. There are no new stories, only remixes. I was saddened with my GM being opposed to uncoupling attributes and races in D&D. I can understand it. Some of it is mechanics based. There are people out there who will make the decision based on the mechanics of the game as opposed to the flavor of it, or as opposed to the diversity nature of it. So I understand, even if I don't necessarily agree. And I don't necessarily think that it means that somebody is a huge racist if they decide to keep the original racial modifiers in D&D, as opposed to uncoupling them as recommended in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I get it. Again, don't agree with it, but I get it. Because it is possible for you to eke out a little bit more min-maxing that way. And some game masters or dungeon masters don't like that. As an example, you can point out, say, I really want to play a bard, which means that I want to have my charisma high. But I also really want to play, say, a dwarf. And dwarves don't get a bonus to charisma. So why would I ever want to play a dwarven bard? And in a lot of ways, that's correct. That D&D is, designed about you being able to say, like, well, I want my attributes to be as high as possible so that I can roll as well as possible, so that I can be effective in combat as much as possible. And the issue then ends up being that some DMs will take a look at that and say, well, dwarves are supposed to have these abilities, and that's kind of built into the game, and I don't want you to have access to, I don't know, stonemasonry or dark vision as a bard unless you have a different class. I don't think these issues are that important, which is why I think that it's more important that you start decoupling the idea that certain races just happen to be better at certain things. I think you can say culturally some things may be more emphasized. You can say that in one society that is built entirely upon being a technocracy, that intelligence would become more highly valued, and so therefore they would have naturally the culture would filter out and end up having slightly higher intelligence scores. You could say that a culture is very honor-based, and therefore charisma and wisdom may be more important than intelligence. Or if they are a martial culture, then they may put more focus on strength and dexterity or constitution. But better to say that than just to straight up say like, well, you're an elf and therefore you suck at it. It's rough. It's also that this is based on the conversations that we're having now at this point in time. It is in the consciousness now, so we deal with it now. That's kind of the way it is. Is time traveling a thing in Dungeons and Dragons? Yes, because anything could be a thing in anything, and time travel can be a part of it. There are spells that can involve some manipulation of time, being able to take things back and do things again. And you can always use the wish spell to do anything. Luke, I have no idea what you're talking about. So time traveling can be a thing, Giant Rat Guy, but mostly time travel is a thing if you want it to be a thing, or if the person running the game wants it to be a thing, then it is a thing. You just have to be careful with time travel because time travel obeys different rules, right? Are you dealing with Avengers rules of time travel? Are you dealing with Back to the Future rules of time travel? Are you dealing with Terminator rules of time travel? Are you dealing with, again and again and again and again and again? So it's really tough to kind of make a definitive decision based on that, but no butterfly effect. I mean, look, there are a lot of different theories about how time travel works, but it's up to you to determine what those rules are. Creates a new timeline. Yep. I mean, the important thing to remember when it comes to that is what are you going to find fun and what is your gaming group going to find fun, and that's what you kind of move into. We were also talking about being RPGs. Recently, we've also seen RPGs make it into video games as a medium. Both games, however, video games are designed differently. We've seen the attempt to bring role-playing games into video games. Neverwinter Nights attempted to bring basically D&D 3rd edition as a whole into video games. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines still remains an extremely popular game to this day, despite the fact that it is old AF. Cough. Why coughing? See the lag. I don't know what you're coughing about now because lag. We recently had Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood. Earthblood or Earth? Yeah, it was Earthblood, right? I can't believe that I'm forgetting the name of the damn game already. Yeah, Earthblood. Which ended up being kind of a disaster. I know that this isn't necessarily fair because they were working on Werewolf before 5th edition really kind of got off the ground, and also were possibly working with 5th edition materials that ended up being tossed. Earthblood is not a great representation of the role-playing game Werewolf the Apocalypse. It isn't. But maybe that was intentional. Maybe, and I'm going to get roasted for saying this, maybe that was for the best. If you try too hard to bring every element of one thing to another when you're changing media, you'll realize that there are going to be cracks, things that don't work. And I don't think you could take something as huge and rich and varied as Werewolf the Apocalypse with all of its mechanics and move it over to a video game and expect everything to survive intact. But I also would say that the experience was so fundamentally different than what I associate with Werewolf the Apocalypse that my question is, why make a werewolf game that ignores so many of its themes? Werewolf is a game about it's about the struggle for the world, the struggle of the triad of the wild, the weaver, and the worm. So essentially, werewolves are eco warriors who are deeply affected by the rage that they feel, and they worked as pack mates. And your time spent in Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood is solitary as fuck. You almost never are working with the help of any other pack mates. You are constantly going alone. You are and while the game gives some excuses as to why this happens, it is, first of all, not the way werewolves would normally operate. Because one of the core themes of Werewolf the Apocalypse is teamwork, both the presence of it and the absence of it. And in this case, teamwork didn't really matter. They were just like, we're making a single player game. And so we're pretty much going to hand wave it all away. And that's not really what you want to see when that's one of the core themes of Werewolf. The idea of frenzy ends up being a positive game mechanic in Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood, whereas in the game, the role-playing game, frenzy is sometimes useful, but most of the time is incredibly inconvenient and can cause major issues for you. So another core tenet that was thrown out the window. I'm not going to criticize it too harshly about the fact that it basically picks a certain kind of werewolf for you to be. You are a male Arun Fianna, I believe. Hamid Fianna Arun, which, I mean, if you played Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, you could pick what clan you were a part of. In Earthblood, you can't. And I can't necessarily fault them on that, because it's very difficult to allow a player to have so many different choices when they're playing a game, and I don't think they have the budget or the team to be able to support a game that had that many choices in it. But at the same time, way to pick the most fucking generic goddamn werewolf. I mean, that isn't a criticism of the translation of the game. That's just me being like, way to be boring, game. You picked another brooding white man who prefers to go it alone than anything else that could have been interesting there. So kind of weak sauce. But the spiritual aspect of it, kind of not, like, they paid lip service to it, but it wasn't really there. You gained power by huffing spiritual herbs as opposed to bargaining with spirits and basing it on your deeds. In essence, the only thing that those two games had in common was the backstory. And the backstory of Werewolf is not enough to make a good video game. And a video game that only relies on that backstory and then mechanically basically tosses out everything else didn't make for a compelling experience. It wasn't a good game. And I think one of the reasons it wasn't a good game was because they basically were like, we're giving you a werewolf experience, and then didn't give it to you, which meant that the core fans of Werewolf the Apocalypse were not going to support it, which meant that no one else was going to support it either, because it didn't have a cheering section for it. Nobody wanted to cheer for this game once they realized just how different it was from that core experience. And that's something else about transmedia that is crucial. You have your golden cohorts. So, golden cohorts. Let's pull up the exact definition of it. Your golden cohorts are the people who are your initial players, the ones who are hyped about your game before it starts, who buy it day one, who are there, they're ready to go, they're going for it. They're the ones who are most likely to be your ardent fans, the ones who are going to tell everyone else about how awesome you are, who are going to spend the money on you, and who will shout about you. And in games that are games as service, where you're expected to maintain either a subscription or buy into microtransactions or cosmetics, your golden cohorts are the ones who are probably going to spend the most, who will encourage others to spend. And Werewolf's golden cohorts would have been people who were playing Werewolf the Apocalypse, and none of them were satisfied. So that game was kind of doomed from the start. You have to be able to please your golden cohorts. Not all of them. You cannot please everyone, and it is folly to try. And you definitely don't need to please the super most hardcore of the fans of the previous material, because they will object to any changes whatsoever. These are the kind of people who say, if Tom Bombadil doesn't show up in Lord of the Rings, then I'm not watching. But you do need to appeal to fans. It does have to feel genuine, and it has to feel like it's worth a fan to experience it. So that's going to be a challenge for anyone trying to adapt Scion or the World of Darkness, because if those golden cohorts aren't happy, you're gonna run into problems. based on what you're dealing with right away. There's just no way around it. Let's see here. Requiem says, I imagine that some games are difficult to translate over to video game format. Some mechanics are so abstract and are based on personal opinion that I can't see it being coded very well. So many mechanics would have to be dropped or altered to make it work. And I think that some people don't recognize that the mechanics are part of what makes the narrative work and vice versa. And that's part of the reason why it's hard to sometimes even just make a film or a movie or a television show based on a game, because if you're taking the mechanics out of it, you're taking out a large part of that experience. Part of the reason why we are so thrilled with the stories that we play in role-playing games is because we are the ones playing them, and there's an element of chance and there's an element of strategy that goes into it. Not just what's the most interesting thing we can come up with, but also what can we do to affect the outcome, and how can the outcome be completely screwed by just random luck. And you don't get that in a scripted experience, so that is something to keep in mind. Roger Twy, I am blanking here, so forgive me. COC? You mean Call of Cthulhu? It's had some interesting adaptations. So Call of Cthulhu itself is an adaptation. It is a role-playing game based on a literary universe created by primarily H.P. Lovecraft, and then kind of runs off and does its own thing. Call of Cthulhu is removed enough from its subject matter that it is a... See, it's very hard for me to comment on Call of Cthulhu. As I've mentioned before, I actually have very little interest in Call of Cthulhu because thematically it doesn't appeal to me, and there are elements of the Lovecraftian universe that I really don't like. Included among those, the focus on sanity as a game concept makes me uncomfortable. I mean, heck, it makes me uncomfortable in a lot of different games, but with Derangements and World of Darkness games, but sanity and the idea that you can just become insane because because you have witnessed the abyss kind of trivializes a lot of what some people have to struggle with day in and day out. I'm not saying that that's bad for other people to enjoy. I'm just saying that it's just something that I don't react well to. And horror as a game concept, tentacles do not frighten me. And I know that that's really being reductive, so it's kind of why I don't like talking about it a lot. But horror as a genre already has difficulty grabbing me because I don't scare easily about those sorts of things. And I feel like I miss out on a large part of it by not feeling the fear or not enjoying the fear. I'd rather create tension and suspense than true fear or horror. So, Spire growth. I mean, look, Spire is something else entirely. Oh yeah, that question was asked and I missed it. Thanks for asking it again, Luke. Again, if you have missed something, please let me know again, because then I can notice it a second time. What do I think Stranger Things has done for RPGs for better or worse? I think that they did a pretty good job of presenting role-playing games as a fun thing that friends do together, and therefore it was the kind of thing that it reminded people of, oh yeah, this exists, and gave it that much more legitimacy in the mainstream. But beyond that, I don't think it had much of an effect. The effect that it had was positive overall, if I were to guess, but I don't think it was anything like so significant. I don't think that sales of Dungeons & Dragons tripled overnight because of Stranger Things. I think that there was a little bit more interest in the retro flavor of the original Dungeons & Dragons. And the show does a relatively good job of kind of highlighting and calling out the fact that it's just a whole bunch of boys playing as opposed to a mixed group of people, because that was kind of more quote unquote realistic. But then they also, they get involved with women, and albeit they don't really play the game a whole lot with them. And by women, I mean girls in a lot of ways. But it's rough to sort of make that call. Because I think Stranger Things is a good show, mostly because it also doesn't rely on horror to be good. And I kind of feel like a lot of Call of Cthulhu relies on horror to be good, which is, again, not bad, but just not for me. But I do think that mainstreaming role-playing games is something that we kind of have to do a bit more. Remember that in media, role-playing games used to be a scapegoat. For the longest time, there was a panic surrounding role-playing games based essentially on a couple of different things. One, it was something that unscrupulous religious leaders latched onto as another threat that they could kind of position forward so that they could... because fear is a great way to get somebody to follow you. Fear someone else, and I can protect you from that fear. Or we are united in our fear or our hatred for something else. But also, the disappearance of one teenager caused a private detective to seek this teenager down, and believed that because he was getting involved in something strange known as Dungeons and Dragons, that was the reason for his disappearance and his death. And when this private detective actually played Dungeons and Dragons, found out that it was absolutely nothing of the sort, and then continued to claim that it was, because that was what was getting him press. And he wrote books about it. And this later on became the one of the inspiring materials for the movie Mazes and Monsters, starring Tom Hanks, about a guy who gets way too into role-playing and it being a problem. So it's true, Plucky Hero, that it can rely on mystery over fear, but it is not the kind of mystery or fear that I find compelling. Supernatural mystery to me isn't thrilling to me because it's not as relatable. Mystery of why is this person doing this thing is interesting. Even why is this person doing this thing, or is this person responsible and they have spooky powers, can be interesting. But just why is this thing happening because of supernatural elements is not enough to hold me. So it is a personal thing, and that's why I don't even like discussing it, because unfortunately, it's hard for me to elaborate on it, because I also don't want to come down on somebody who does enjoy it. Scott really enjoys playing Arkham Horror, and I think that's great, but I don't want to play it with him because I don't like the Arkham universe at all. So, and maybe the game is a ton of fun, but to me, that's just proof that narrative actually matters when it comes to games. So some people like Vampire, some people don't. Like, I have played Vampire the Masquerade. It is by far not one of my favorite splats in the world of darkness, but I play it because a lot of other people play it, and it's something that I can tolerate a bit more. But like, it's not my first choice. And more these days, Vampire is a game that I kind of steer away from, because it's basically a game that plays a lot about consent. And recently, that's not a topic that I feel like I want to play with these days. Maybe I will in the future. It's fine. But vampires are about predators and being predatory and basically being able to do things to others with or without their consent. And that just doesn't really do it for me. And remember, feelings are nebulous, right? What I feel about one thing doesn't necessarily transpose to another thing. So it's kind of a weird situation to be in, but it is one that we deal with nonetheless. Let's go back up, because I'm sure there's things that I've missed here. So Requiem points out there's a reason, in my opinion, that if Exalted were ever brought to TV, it would only work as an anime, because you would need those long asides and exposition drops during a combat to help the audience make sense of the powers. But that's me. I don't necessarily think you'd have to do it that way. I think that's one way of doing it, for sure. But the main reason why I think that Exalted would probably end up being an anime is because it is heavily influenced by anime storytelling. I don't think it has to be, but I think that using the conventions of anime will make Exalted easier for a bunch of people to understand. It is easier, not necessarily better, and sometimes easier is important. One of the things that we forget when it comes to the creation of media is that you can have the best of intentions, but if you don't have the budget or the team or the permissions that you need, you're stuck. So when I say easy, I think that it would be possible for you to do a live action interpretation of Exalted and to have it look good and to have it be amazing, but it would be so expensive to make, and you'd have to find somebody willing to invest in that, and I don't think you necessarily would. Animation is cheaper than special effects or even, visual effects in a live action recording. So sometimes it's a production question. You don't have to please as many people with anime as you do in a feature film that's laden with visual effects. So it is an issue that we have to kind of. You're watching the changing on YouTube. Very good, Zen of Games. That's basically the situation. But yeah, I do think that it would be easier to do in an anime format. So that is a thing to sort of hold on to. So Requiem, also, when you say it's the same reason why video games are blamed for violence, we have a habit of seeing a correlation and assuming causation. It's not just that. One of the very unfortunate but easy ways to explain that is because when something horrible happens, we want to have something to blame. And we often don't want to blame ourselves. So we blame something else, something that we don't necessarily care about that much, because it makes us feel better to say that this happened for a reason, as opposed to this happened because of chance, or this happened because of something that's more endemic that I can't do anything about, or this happened because of something that I like. The main thing that I can point out is that when it comes to violence, if we want to look for something to ban, we should ban men. The vast majority of violence is carried out by men. The vast majority of violent crimes are committed by men. I'm not even talking about a certain kind of man, a certain age of man, a certain race of man. It's just straight up men. So if we just preemptively threw all men in jail, would that mean that we'd have a lot less violence in the streets today? Right? But that kind of thinking is so reductive and so out there that it's not easy for people to kind of realize or rationalize. So instead they look for something else. Okay, well, is it guns? Is it easy access to guns? Well, access to guns is enshrined in the United States Constitution, and it is a huge part of the lives of many Americans. And it is a difficult thing for you to start saying well, it's because of guns, because for at least one of the political parties in the United States, a large part of your voting bloc will turn on you if you decide to start saying that their guns might be an issue. And it's part of the culture in the United States. So if you can't blame men and you can't blame guns, you got to blame something else. And you start running out of issues that you can do that are directly related. So you start looking for other things that are convenient that you can kind of highlight and say, well, this is the problem, without any real basis. And so video games have fallen prey to this. But so have movies, and so have television shows, and so have comic books, and so has rock and roll music, and so have books. Right? Books used to be a thing that people would be like, he spends all day reading. What an idiot. Why isn't he out doing things with his hands like he should be? Or, she thinks this thing. Well, she got that thought from a book. And what a terrible thing books are, that they can fill your head with such knowledge. So it is an issue. So Nifel, and please tell me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, because that does, that is something that I do care about. I don't know how you'd go about introducing an audience to the world of Exalted over the space of a 90-minute or 2-hour movie. You can. there are shorthand ways to do it. You can do a Zack Snyder montage. Look, you can take Zack Snyder to task for any number of things, but the guy knows how to do a good montage at the beginning of a film to kind of get you into it. You can, and you can also just not explain it and let people sort of, absorb the world as it is presented and then kind of move on from there. You don't need to go, because that's another thing. Role-playing games often have very deep histories. World of Darkness, Exalted, Scion, they have very deep kind of core stuff that you need to know, or that you might want to know, but you don't have to tell a good story. But then people miss it and they're like, well, why didn't they go in depth about the realm? Why didn't they talk about how the Gangrel suffer this very specific... Doesn't matter for every story, so you don't have to tell it. Or if you do, you just show it. And then when people are like, oh, I wonder why that happened, they can look it up in the books if they want to. So that's not really a huge issue, but it is one of the issues that you have to run into. And that's also why Exalted may be better in the course of a television show or a series, because then you have more time for world building. So the... let's just go for some other topics or other comments here. There are too many factors that attribute to violence that you cannot peg it on one thing. Some studies, as I recall, actually found the opposite, that violent video games helped people let off steam and were less prone to violence. Another study that has been put out, and I'm going to put a sexual violence trigger warning on this, and I will wave when I'm no longer talking about it, is that incidences of violent sexual assault or rape go down in areas where pornography is available and easy to consume, which goes against what we thought about those sorts of crimes, calling them crimes of power as opposed to crimes of lust. But it is proven that access to pornography and access to sex work drives down the sexual assault rate. And yet people claim the opposite. I don't have that answer, but it is a difficult thing to work out for. So there's the wave. It is done. Wave. But the wave is in. So it is just something that we have to take into account, that also studies can show anything that you want, unfortunately. But, and this is why we have content warnings. So the idea of, there are huge issues with peer review in science. I mean, part of the problem is that you don't get accolades for peer review. You get accolades for being the first to a discovery. So that's an issue. Yeah, so people don't take responsibility for their actions. It must be games and books. I mean, Zen of Games, it is unfortunately the case. But the more that role-playing is seen in other media, to tie it back to our original topic, the more that we see role-playing games in other media, the less it will be something that people will just pounce on to blame. And we're already seeing a lot less of that these days. And also, the more that we see it in other media, the less that we'll see the unflattering depiction of role-playing. The idea that in media, if you are a role player, then you are almost for sure a socially maladjusted person. You're almost for sure male. You role play as a means of escape from your daily life, which you cannot handle, as opposed to a fun activity or storytelling that you do with your friends. Live action role playing especially is subject to this sort of coverage. And that if anybody who is attractive, especially attractive women, are role players, it's usually because either they're forced to, or because they've begrudgingly learned that it's fun, even though they're playing with a bunch of like maladjusted idiots. So this is why Stranger Things can help, because being like, role-playing games are now things that people in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, their 70s are doing with regularity. So as long as it just becomes a thing that, yeah, this person does this particular hobby, then it's no different than somebody who decides to do rock climbing. not every rock climber is seen as somebody who is of a certain type, other than probably athletic. And people who role play will eventually not be seen as anybody except for somebody who might be driven to create. So we have that. And then the music gets sad. When dollars are attached, integrity erodes. Sometimes. Often. The thing is that dollars tend not to be attached to something without a reason. And if you want to get a large amount of money in a short amount of time, then often somebody wants something in return, and it isn't necessarily the product that you're giving them, which means that they want certain messages put forward. They want advertising. They want reasons for doing that. And one of the things that often they do is they want to appeal to a wide audience so that they can recoup their investment. And a wide audience means sometimes fudging over the truth in favor of something that's popular. So, did an American politician do a big RPG Twitch session with celebrities? I don't remember hearing this. It's very possible, but I'm also not American, so yeah, AOC did an Among Us stream. Americans are learning how to use Twitch, but I don't know of a role-playing experience with which that's happened yet. So Requiem points out, one issue that I have with adapting tabletop role-playing games to other media is that they try to cram as much lore as humanly possible into the movie or TV show to no real benefit and often to the detriment of the story, which is kind of the point that I was trying to make earlier. You don't have to do that. You can have it inform the film, right? You can add hints to it. You can do world building. Marvel is doing a pretty good job at this by making sure that the hardcore fans are greeted with things that they recognize and go, oh, and they point at it, but without kind of being like, well, okay, you want to do Marvel Civil War? Here's 200 comic books worth of backstory for you to get through before we get to Civil War. So that helps. As a woman in 2021, people are still really shocked to find out I roleplay. Yep. And again, this also depends on the kind of games that you play. Going way back to what we were discussing before, that certain games are more likely to find a diverse populace attached to it. And thankfully that's starting to average out. But for a long time, if you were playing D&D, people knew exactly what to think of you. And I mean, it's never been correct, but thankfully that's sort of changing of late. But World of Darkness has always kind of attracted a wider audience, but that doesn't mean that they are woke. But yeah, we won't necessarily continue harping on that one particular topic, just because I feel like we discussed it a bunch. You can choose whatever name you want, Luke. And if you decide to change your name, just the only thing that I would request, although you're not responsible for doing so, is just let us know so that we know, oh, this person was the person who we've interacted with in the past. Is escapism a bad thing? Escaping a stressful situation and processing in safe space can be beneficial. Not necessarily a bad thing, no. The problem is that as portrayed in the media, it very much is. The idea being like, I don't know how to talk to girls, so instead I'm going to roll a die and pretend that I can smooch a girl. That's the kind of escapism that you'll see because it's an easy joke to make. It's an easy, quick, low effort laugh that you can get, and people will do it. Roll the dice to see if I'm getting drunk. Ha 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 ha. Right, is another way of saying this person can't handle a normal activity like going out and drinking with friends. But escapism in and of itself isn't a bad thing. But in the span of like a television show or a movie, somebody who says I need to escape, more often than not is saying that's the core of the drama. Things happen in movies for a reason. It's also why you don't see when somebody calls somebody else in a movie, they don't kind of start off like, hey, how's it going? Okay, cool. What'd you do today? Uh-huh. How are the kids? Great. Anyway, there's a bomb that we have to explode, right? Like, they don't even say hello or goodbye or or whatever half the time, right? Because it's literally just, let's get to the point because we want to keep the pacing of the story tight. So if someone's like, oh, I roleplay to escape. Why do you roleplay to escape? Yeah, because sometimes I just feel like being somebody else and I have a stressful job. So it's sort of nice to sort of put that aside for a while. They're not going to bring that up. If somebody's roleplaying to escape, it's the core part of the drama for that character. Unless you make a silly web series. I mean, goal. Now, we have talked, that is true, Luke, about Life is Strange. We have talked about role-playing games going into other media. But one thing that we haven't really discussed today, although we have discussed it previously, is taking other media and putting it into role-playing games. And that is one of the things that I will point out as another danger to watch out for. We've said it before, but I'll tie it in just because we're talking about this topic. You cannot expect stories that you've experienced in other media to be immediately applicable to role-playing games and easily swapped over. Role-playing games are communal storytelling experiences, not scripted sequences. And scripted sequences get away with a lot more, or a lot more different things. The classic example is the lone wolf character archetype. If you want to play a lone wolf, that means that you are asking everyone else at the table to put up with your just not wanting to be around the group a whole lot, and you wandering away or being mysterious and not talking about your past, and everyone else being like, keep your secrets, and they're like, no, I want you to ask, I want you to care, right? Like, that is easier in a scripted sequence because we don't necessarily have to have explanations, and we don't have to have characters who conveniently only ask questions when it's dramatically or comedically appropriate. In a role-playing game, things just happen. So if you decide that you want to play a character who never wants to talk to anybody else, eventually the players will be like, well, it isn't fun for me to stand here and try to talk to you and be frustrated, so I will stop talking to you. And then that ruins the lone wolf's time because they're like, but the whole point of being a lone wolf is that eventually you find out about my deep and troubled backstory. And meanwhile, players are like, we all have deep and troubled backstories. We don't care about yours because you're not giving us a reason to like you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you got to be careful when you're like, I want to make a character like this person from this movie or this film. Be aware that you cannot guarantee that you get to play that character because you are not doing it in a vacuum. You have to do it with a whole bunch of other people around you as well. And that's something that you got to take into account. So Requiem, I'm going to point this out just because I think it's an interesting little tweak. If a movie added all the little things of real life, I imagine half the movie would be filled with awkward silences and pointless conversations about trying to remember a word. There are some films that have done very well because they tended to try to be that hyper-realistic. And it is a certain form of filmmaking, hyper-realism. They often don't do very well in terms of popular content, but they do exist. And some of them have done okay. Some of them are seen as quite popular. There are movies out there that, even though they're a little bit larger than life, have at its core, like, what do you do when? The movie Clerks was made essentially that was like, two people who have to serve customers throughout the day and they think it sucks. And they have conversations about random shit. Just straight up random shit. About what happens to the independent contractors on the Death Star. They don't have to talk about, it has nothing to do with the plot of the film. But there it is. It's in there. So I'm not even supposed to be here today. So there are films that can do that, but it has to kind of be the actual point. Anyway. So yeah, I swear tons of popular current TV shows are just adapted from someone's RPG campaign. Quite possibly. It wouldn't be the first time. I will say, and this is not meant to criticize anybody, I'll bring this up again. One of the hardest things to do well is to tell somebody about your role-playing game who wasn't playing or who wasn't watching and have them be interested in it. because you have an emotional connection to that story, but no one else who wasn't present does by default. So you saying, oh yeah, I had this one time where I had this guy and he went forward and he did a thing and then I rolled a 20 and people like lost their shit because I rolled a 20. It was so cool and it was so awesome. Like, yeah, it was awesome for you, but it's probably not awesome for everyone else. And it's, yeah, Pulp Fiction had the Royale with Cheese conversation. Yeah, Tarantino also tends to do that. The conversation about tipping at the beginning of Reservoir Dogs, et cetera, et cetera. I even had the owner of the cafe come up and ask if I was making a movie. That's fair. Funny anecdotes are less funny to outsiders too. It is the unfortunate reality of things. And I will also say that one of the things that I really love about the kind of community that we've built around RPG Clinic is that people can talk about their games and be interested in it, but no one is expected to listen. I am not judged if I pay attention to somebody's role-playing story or not. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I can get involved, and sometimes I politely read it and realize that it doesn't really appeal to me, but that's fine. And sometimes I don't read them at all because I'm busy and there's a lot of text going on and I just miss it. It's more to remember that if you're trying to take a story that you've got together in a role-playing game and then move it to another piece of media, you got to make sure that you realize that your story probably wasn't paced the way that a film or television show would. Characters can be inspired, stories can be inspired, and that's what I'd recommend that you do. But just trying to make a straight adaptation probably isn't going to work the way that you want to. Yeah, that's why when I talk about my favorite changeling character, I'm always very brief because all my favorite things about him are you had to be there moments. So I'm just like, it's a fox puka. Yep. Because unfortunately, that's kind of the way that it goes. Look, we play our campaigns for an audience, and that's great. But I would never be like, okay, I'm going to walk up to somebody and be like, hey, you, here, read the synopsis of our game, and that's all you need to enjoy it. Because that's not actually going to be as enjoyable. The reason why we post synopses up, the reason why I would say read the synopsis is because then I'd be like, then you can watch the game and you can be part of the actual experience of it. You can be part of the emotional moments of knowing that you were there either live or at least knowing that you could watch as other people were experiencing it live, but you have the synopsis so that you have context for what's going on. Otherwise, no. If I wanted to write a story for other people to experience and enjoy, I wouldn't just adapt a role-playing game, even one that I was running, even one that I thought was a lot of fun. I just wouldn't. But that's because I don't think that the media works that way. I think that inspiration is more what we should be striving towards and looking forward to. Inspiration is something that we can get behind. Have we had an RPG clinic on how GMs negatively impact the game? So many games where I've enjoyed the side RPG with the other characters and the GM has actually made it unpleasant. Bless us, every year they ask about Academy and I ask about their forum RPG plotlines every week. See, but that's okay, right? Like in some cases, you really can get involved. I just mean that as in terms of like assuming that somebody will be interested, not necessarily. Assuming that, but also remember that people may be emotionally invested because you care about the person telling the story. I am more interested in hearing about a game from somebody I know than somebody who I had met 5 minutes ago. And unfortunately, if you're doing a television show or a movie, your entire audience are people who just met you 5 minutes ago. So, yeah, and Requiem saying, in my experience, my gamer friends receive my gaming stories better than my non-gamer friends because it's a shared experience. But like half my funny military stories are not funny to non-military people. Exactly. But just to get on GMs who negatively impact the game, the GM is another person at the table, and every person at that table has the ability to both make your game great or to make your game awful. And the GM or storyteller or DM or guide or whatever you want to call them is again, I don't want to say is more important than everybody else, but they do have a disproportionate effect on the game because they are also the adjudicator of the rules, and they are the sort of the director. Now, if you're making a film, the director isn't the person who wrote the story. That would be the writers or the screenwriters. The director isn't the person who is performing on screen. That's the actors. They're not responsible for creating the set design. They're not responsible for the choreography. They're not responsible for the cinematography, but they are responsible for tying it all together. Think of a role-playing game as like if the storyteller is the director and the players are like the writers in a lot of ways. People don't necessarily think of it this way. They think that like, oh yeah, you wrote this module and you're presenting for the players. But a lot of role-playing games, it ends up being based on what the players do, not what the storyteller has said, that drives a large part of the action of the game. But if the director sucks, then the entire production is going to suck. A sucky director is more likely to sink a project than one actor, say, right? Or one set designer. Because that director is responsible for keeping an eye on the overall vision of the project. And that's what a storyteller is. Now, in ideal groups, everybody is concerned with the overall vision, and everybody's concerned with everybody having a good time, and everybody's concerned with the writing, and everybody's concerned. But that isn't always the case, and usually you kind of have to default to the storyteller being like the director. So if you have a crappy director, it can make the whole game feel less good, and yet you can still have fun interacting with your fellow players. Absolutely. But if you have a bad GM, consider not having a bad GM. That's kind of a dick move to say it that way, but you can find somebody else to run a game, or you can run a game yourself if you find that it's just not working out, or you can give your GM feedback, because I guarantee you that a lot of GMs don't receive a lot of feedback from their players, or at least not actionable feedback. So it is a thing. But I would say that if you're playing at a table with, say, 4 other people, and one of the players is kind of not your cup of tea, that game is more easily salvageable than if the storyteller is not your cup of tea. If the director is somebody who you don't get along with, it's going to be way harder for you than if it's just another actor at the table. Everybody's important to the project. You couldn't do it without any of them, but the director is going to have a disproportionate effect on your enjoyment of the game. Which is also part of the reason why game masters tend to be in demand, because it can be more difficult. It certainly has more pressure and more stress, and it can often be a very thankless job. Thankfully, I don't have to be that way. I feel very appreciated, but I feel appreciated now. Throughout my career, I have definitely felt unappreciated for running games. I'm sure that many of you have felt the same way. And sometimes that's unintentional. Sometimes players are like, oh yeah, no, I absolutely love this game master, but I never told her, or I never ended up trying to make her feel welcome or happy. But c'est la vie. It is what it is. So unfortunately, I don't have a ton of things to say about that, about the idea of a poor ST, other than, much like if you're dealing with a player that you don't want to deal with, you need to either use your word hole, or you need to find another game, or you need to put up with it. Those are kind of your 3 options. But a storyteller is harder to recover from. C'est la vie is spelt that way. In French, it means that's life. So, c'est la vie is just like, yeah, well, that's life for you. So that's it's kind of a co-opted, like English people co-opt things from other languages all the damn time. but I also speak French, so I'm more likely to pull out French terms like that sometimes, or swear in Québécois. Great song by Bewitched. Terrible song by Robbie Neville. Déjà vu comes from French, although we say déjà vu, or but in French it would be déjà vu. Irish girl group from years ago. That's true. A déjà vu. I mean, I still remember in The Matrix, Carrie-Anne Moss saying like, a déjà vu is a glitch in The Matrix, and I know that I think that Carrie-Anne Moss probably would pronounce déjà vu in another way because she's Canadian, and I think she does know how to speak French, but I also can hear the Wachowskis telling her that your standard American audience won't understand unless you call it a déjà vu. So, and that's okay too. That's fine. That doesn't make Americans worse. Absolutely not. We talked about accents and dialects before. Je ne sais quoi is je ne sais quoi, which means I don't know. Or I don't know that. Oui, je parle français. Je suis né ici à Montréal. Et si tu ne parles pas français à Montréal, c'est un peu plus difficile. Malheureusement, mon français n'est pas parfait. Je le comprends très bien et je peux le parler, mais je ne suis pas si bilingue que ça. J'espère qu'après quelques années, ça va me retourner, mais il y avait à peu près une dizaine d'années dont je n'avais pas besoin d'utiliser de français. Alors, c'est pas que je le perds, mais c'est juste je suis moins habile si je ne parle pas français constamment. Mais maintenant, je travaille dans un studio où on parle les deux, anglais et français. Alors, ça devient un peu plus facile pour moi. Est-ce que je connais le mot tabarnak? Yes. Tabarnak, which is, yes, I do have an accent, Québécois accent, because I was born and raised and live in Quebec. Who would have thought? No. Okay, so here's the deal. Giant Rat Guy, I'm going to stop you right there. We do not discuss Quebec politics when it comes to that on this channel. I am not saying that you did something bad, but we do not discuss that specific thing on this channel. Sorry. No, you didn't do anything wrong. There was no way you could have known. I have to put a lid on it right away because unfortunately, it is the sort of thing that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on Quebec politics while knowing nothing about Quebec politics. So, and again, not saying that that's what you were trying to do, but saying something like Vive le Québec libre is making a very provocative political statement in a lot of circles. So, and one that that in fact at this point, many Quebecers, arguably the majority of Quebecers, no longer believe. So, yeah, no, I get it. So no problem. But I got a yellow card you on that one. Which means, again, we're just pausing. You haven't done anything wrong. We just have to pause to make sure that we let you know. Ben, bienvenue. And if I had my only real experience with French is the ending of Eddie Izzard's show Dressed to Kill. Fair. I love being able to speak another language. I think that it is a very cool thing. Bon Cop, Bad Cop. So we have a friend who was in Bon Cop, Bad Cop. We have, possibly several friends who are in Bon Cop, Bad Cop. But yeah, that's a classic. I unfortunately can't speak to Bon Cop, Bad Cop 2. I really can't. That's beyond my experience. Plucky. This is actually an appropriate question to answer, so I will answer it because it looks like we're moving on to like general questions at this point in my botching French. RPG Clinic, how do you handle your soundscapes for RPGs? Do you use royalty free, and do you build playlists and moodscapes? Any tips would be welcome. We used to build music from any source that we liked. We often used a lot from video games because it was less likely to get called out on Twitch, because on Twitch, if you're playing a video game, you're using video game music, so you don't get flagged. However, when they started really cracking down on DMCA and we realized that we really shouldn't be doing that, we license music. All the music that you hear on this channel is licensed, that we have the license to play and use on our Twitch channel, our YouTube channel, and the rest. Unfortunately, it means that I don't get to play with leitmotifs as much because it was easy for me to be like, I remember this theme from this game, and I put it in and I know what it's going to do. And game music is often great for looping because it's designed to loop, and other music is not. So I feel like our music is suffering a little bit, but it'll get better as I get more kind of used to the music that we have. But what we do is we build playlists. When I am running Exaltridge Academy right now, I have a playlist for like our opening and closing, so the songs that we always use. I have a character themes tab, so if I am involving a very specific character, I will play that character's theme sometimes. I have ambient, which is just music to play as normal. I have drama, which is when things are getting serious or when people are discussing things that are that have ramifications. I have combat, which is music to be played in high octane situations or especially tense situations. And then I just have them. And as I play them, I start to know what they are, and therefore I know which ones to pick. I also can put comments on any individual track, which in the music player that we use, which is Foobar for our streams. It's not the music that I use on my main computer, but it's the one that we use for streams. You can see a comment section, and I put comments, things like, this is for this character, or this one. For full party, what I did was I put specifically mood, and then I'd put a number, and the number was the intensity. So I'd have something like sad 1, and it wouldn't be like very sad, and it'd be quiet, but I could put it under something that was supposed to be a little melancholy. But then I'd have like sad 4, and sad 4 would be something that was much more heart-wrenching or serious, and I wouldn't play it that often, but it would be there. So there was that. Do I have Bow Chicka Wow Wow music for certain characters? I do have themes for when certain characters interact, but I guess the thing that I would point out is that not all sexual relationships in these games are meant to be played for comedy. We often laugh and giggle about them, partially because, I mean, they are funny, and partially because the idea of sex is still something that can cause a certain amount of discomfort or turbulence. So laughing is a way to sort of bleed off that stress and all that. But in general, certain relationships in the games that I run are have different meanings and different kind of themes to it. And the one that you're referencing, which I am deliberately not calling out by name because it is kind of a spoiler for anybody who hasn't caught up yet, that one is a special relationship in a lot of ways. So no, I wouldn't cheapen it by playing Bow Chicka Wow Wow music. I know that you were making a joke, but just for the sake of it, not everything should be a joke. Groupies and Humble Bundle often have offers on royalty-free licenses of music. Would it be useful to link them in the clinic for us? You're welcome to. We have a subscription to Epidemic Sound. They're in fact the ones who are playing the music that you're listening to right now. And Epidemic Sound has thousands of tracks. So in general, we're not looking for music at this time. But you're welcome to link it because I'm sure it would help other people. But part of what our subscriptions and donations and bits go towards is things like maintaining our website and maintaining our music license at this point. In addition to the equipment that we use, all the money that we get from subscriptions and donations and bits gets turned around and put into the channel. We don't generate a profit off this, and we don't do it for a profit, but it is nice that we're able to improve the stream as we move forward as a result. Oh, the bot isn't on, Kate, because I'm bad. And at this point, there's only 15 minutes left, so I'm not going to bother. Yeah, I hope that you do enjoy the story. And again, one thing that I will say that I'm surprised at, but I guess I kind of understand, is we put the synopses up online and stuff like that so that if somebody's interested in watching live, they can get caught up quickly. But it seems like a lot of people just want to watch from the beginning and don't want to join in until they've seen all of it. We don't mind either way. If that's how you want to play it, that's great. If you never watch live, but you still watch and then want to participate in the community, you should join our Discord. The Discord is a great place for that, and it can be a lot of fun to interact with the community. People have created their own headcanon original characters so that they sort of comment on what's happening in the game in character, which is fun, but reminds me when I ruined myself watching 150 hours to catch up with the Nexus Exalted campaign. So the thing is, we also don't want that to happen, which is why we're dividing our content into seasons now, so that we can kind of say like, well, a season has passed and that has been a storyline. So if you don't watch the first season but want to watch the second one, we can give you a synopsis of what happened in the first season so that then you can start fresh. So yeah, if somebody's looking to use it for broadcasting purposes, I recommend using whatever music you want for your games, but I recommend also if you're running your games online, if you're specifically running them online for an audience like on Twitch or YouTube, you do not want to get into a situation where one day you find out that all of your content is gone because you did not license your music, or worse, that your channel is banned. Now, in the end, on YouTube, they don't really care that much. It's just that then they automatically monetize your videos, and not for you, but for somebody else. But the amount of views that we get is negligible. We're not making any money off them anyway. So we wouldn't care as much about YouTube, but because we're on Twitch and we don't want to get banned on Twitch, we've also done the right thing. The other thing is that morally, you should be licensing the music that you use if you're using it in a public context. So, you know, go ahead and do that. It's the right thing to do, and you'll feel better doing it. Totally understandable if you're still getting your head around Discord. Thankfully, I'm pleased to report that our community is quite forgiving in that way. But yeah, or they delete all trace of your content because they close the game you were playing down. Yeah, fair. Twitch sinks literally all of your content. Yeah, that sucks. Yeah, we'll still take some extra questions. We still got another 10 or so minutes to go. So Requiem, one question you had about our Exalted games: how do you handle charms that can only be used once per story? I guess how you were defining a story for your games, or did you house rule it to fit the streaming format? If somebody was to use a charm that could only be used once per story, I would tell them when a story resets. I would say, we have completed a story and we are moving on to another one, so those reset. To my recollection, I don't think any player has used a once per story charm at this point yet, so it hasn't come up. But I don't really like kind of determining. That's cool, Ash. Hey, you know what, Ash? I know what I can do. This is for you. Yeah, you had a handful of story resets in Nexus. In Academy is what I mean. Like, there hasn't been any in Academy recently. But good slurp. Zac Efron still being melodramatic, but now this time in school. That's totally fair. I don't like mechanics that much that sort of determine like you can only use this once per story. I get it. I understand it, because it's sort of like you want sometimes to give somebody a powerful effect, but you don't want it to last for too long. So in general, if someone says that something lasts for a story, I limit it to a certain number of sessions. I limit it to sessions and not time, because it feels really badly if you're like, well, you can only use this once a year, and then the entire contents of a whole campaign of 100 episodes could take less than a year of in-game time. So does that mean you only get to use the charm once? Well, that's kind of disappointing. So you kind of have to balance it out. When does the story begin and when does the story end? You could also sort of just call it in the moment. And a player can be like, I think it's been long enough since I've last used this charm. May I use it again? And you could be like, yeah, a story has passed. Or you could be like, no, it still sort of feels like it's in the same narrative arc. But oftentimes I would just tell my players a story has happened for the purposes of like gaining experience, of resetting charms and that sort of thing. I'm nearing 21 sessions and I've really only covered about 2 weeks in game time. Yep. And they went from Essence 1 to Essence 2 in that time too. But like, I don't care about that as much, right? Like, I want players to feel like they get to improve and move forward and stuff like that. So I sort of hand wave that. It's okay to hand wave things as long as everybody at the table is okay with hand waving it. And I'd really recommend hand waving. I think that it's a great way to sort of be like, yep, this is how the game normally works, but PCs just exist on a different continuum and power level. They're just better at things than other NPCs sometimes, and that's just the way things are. And I think that's okay. I will sacrifice a lot for the sake of just playability and story. So there is that. I'm glad that you got a meeting, Ash, and I'm glad to see you. I'm always glad to see you, but you never have to feel obligated to stick around if you are busy. Does your ST style stay consistent, or do you change certain aspects when GMing for different groups of people? I always change based on the players that I have at the table. The one person who I always have to take into account is myself. So I don't really like playing games if I can't play a game that I'm not interested in playing. So if you're asking me to play, say, Pathfinder, I'm going to be less enthused about running it because I don't really like running Pathfinder. So in that way, I might just not do it at all. But I will always change things. If I've got a group that really just wants to sit down and knock down monsters and really play tactically, then I will change the way that I storytell to let them engage more about the tactical nature of the game. If I'm streaming a game, my storytelling style changes again, because now I'm aware of not only do I have to satisfy the players that I have, but I also have an audience that I have to take into account. I have a very strict time limit because, well, not very strict, but in general, I'm like, we're going to stream for this long, so I have to begin and end at this time. I have to take into account that other people may be more sticklers about the universe that I'm playing in than if I was just playing with 3 people who barely skimmed the book. Or what if I'm playing with 5 people who know the universe backwards and forwards? I'm going to have to change that too. So always, always, always I will adapt. And I think everybody does. I don't think that you'll find a storyteller who doesn't adapt to their players. Even storytellers who claim they're not very good at what they do, people will do things in order to appeal to the groups that they're in. So yes, my storytelling style stays consistent if everything else is consistent, and since nothing stays consistent, it doesn't. Besides, I learn as I go, and as I learn, my storytelling style will change. So even if I only played with the same 3 people and no audience for 10 years straight, my storytelling style would change. Every time Ash speaks, I just got to take some water, which is a good way of living. So yeah, that's what I would say about that. Again, my opinions are my own, and I am just one person shouting into the abyss. There's plenty of other people out there. Drinking water when you're upset is like fucking genius. One of the things that I will point out is that crying is, it can be cathartic. It can actually help you, but crying is also stressful on the system, and drinking water after you've cried is so important. If somebody is crying, maybe don't just like abandon them and run up and get water and come back. But if somebody has been physically showing that much emotion, you are totally okay to go and get them water. It is a great idea. And preferably get them water. Getting them something else, like getting them alcohol is a depressant. Getting them coffee is a stimulant. They can have alcohol or coffee at another point. Absolutely. But hydrate them. Hydrating is a great thing to do in order to keep things stable. So we got 6 minutes left. What else can we look at? Question for video game RPGs. Yeah, sure. Fire away. Drinking a glass of water before you eat can also be a great way to keep you from overeating. I've heard that. When I play an RPG, how much player choice and actual role-playing opportunity do I enjoy? Okay, a very interesting question. I have teaser for the campaign after Academy, so I will tell you that is actually a very good thing. I'm just going to answer this question first, but I will tell you because we do have plans. I do have plans, but in terms of your question, Ash, let's throw it up there on the screen. I suffer from FOMO when it comes to playing games. I hate the idea that I am missing out on a crucial part of story because it's hidden. So that's an issue. I also hate when a story is tied to mechanics so heavily that I feel like I must do something in order to get the good ending. And it's not something that I would want to do. Like, for instance, in a game where it's possible for some of your squad members to die permanently, I can find that a really interesting moment. Like, I have lost access to the squad member. That's fine. But then when I find out that, like, I could have kept that squad member alive, well, the issue is, do I want to remain true to the narrative that has occurred in the game, or do I want to be like, but I want to see this character's story, and that means I guess I have to repeat things. That's a problem. It's a problem if I'm like, okay, you can get the best weapon possible for this character, but the only way to do that is if you unlock this particular narrative path. But what if I don't want that narrative path? What if that's the narrative path that I don't want? And yet at the same time, it's like, yeah, but this weapon is pretty cool. And you're like, oh, fuck. So, sometimes I find that if you give a lot of player choice or a lot of role-playing opportunity, and you make that an undesirable through mechanics, that can be a problem for me. This is... so, in fact, the other thing that I'll point out is that sandbox games, for me at this stage of my life, can be very difficult for me because I don't necessarily have the time to get invested in a game. If your game takes 10 hours for me to complete, 10 hours is something that I can put in. No problem. But if your game is like an open sandbox game, and you're like, you can wander around this world for 200 hours, I don't necessarily have 200 hours for your game. Maybe I don't like it 200 hours enough, because these days my gaming time is more limited. So open sandbox games are games that I often tend to not enjoy as much, because I find that, like, I get in, I tool around. If the gameplay isn't fun, but the narrative is great, but I'm like, this narrative is going to take me forever to get through, then I just don't bother. I also can find that... you mean like getting the early Genji 11 Final Fantasy 6 by saying no 3 times? See, like, that's an issue for me, Pukajutsu, in that, like, I don't want to say... I don't want to make character choices that really fuck me over in terms of the game, or that make a huge difference in how the game plays. The trial in Chrono Trigger is a great example, because whether you... it was a very cool moment where I was like, okay, my actions at the beginning of the game determine whether or not I am sentenced or whether I'm found guilty or innocent in the trial. But it doesn't actually make a huge gameplay difference. You get some extra items, but those items are consumables, right? If you told me, like, oh, but you get this really cool weapon that will last you for the next 5 hours, well, then I'd care more about whether or not I got declared innocent or guilty. So, ugh. In this case, we've been debating on Catherine, how far we want to take it. We're all D&D folks and like the wide open world design philosophy. We also really want to design the tight-knit story experience like more like Obsidian's typical RPGs are. Right now, everything connects to one another, and your choices actually affect the world and characters, and there are a lot of locked options based on certain dialogue choices and some mechanical choices within early story elements, like how many quests you did for folks or if you have certain items, etc. So here's what I'm going to say. Obsidian does this better than most. I will say that one thing about the Outer Worlds is that it's a tighter experience than, like, say, Fallout 4, which can help for somebody in my demographic. I would say if there's anything that I can encourage you to do, and this is free advice from a narrative designer from a competing game company, do not punish me for going down a certain storyline. That's what I'll say. You absolutely don't have to give me the entire experience, but like, for instance, if I don't do any quests for anybody in a town, the town doesn't necessarily have to like me. I totally get that. But you can't present me two sides of an argument and then say you have to pick a side. And then if you pick the side that you don't like, punish me for it, because that sucks. This is part of the problem that I had with The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 essentially was like, violence is awful, and then forces you to do horrific violence. And I felt like the game was trying to tell me that I was a horrible person and then forcing me to be a horrible person. And that kind of, like, that's a kind of story that some people can appreciate, but overall it just meant that I didn't want to play. Because I'm like, I don't want to engage in this violence, because you're basically telling me that the violence is horrific and horrible and awful. And yet you're forcing me to do it. Like, I can't just sneak around. I have to kill everybody. And then you tell me that I'm an awful person because I've killed a lot of people. Like, bah. So that's what I would say. And if you want to talk about more about this, then we can take that conversation offline. We're hitting at 7, and I do have to answer one more question here. Yeah, let players feel bad about their own choices, not about the choices you force on them. So a teaser for the campaign after Exaltwitch Academy, which was brought up by NFL. We are ending our first season of Exaltwitch Academy. We have played 18 episodes. We have 3 episodes left in the first season. After that, we're going to have one session where we will reflect on what happened in the previous few episodes. Then we're going to take a 1-week break. After that break, we're going to be running some one-shots, some random games to sort of cleanse the palate and help us get ready for our next season. And our next season is going to be Exalted, but we can't tell you exactly what because we haven't decided yet. It could be Exaltwitch Academy Season 2, which will just be a continuation of Exaltwitch Academy. It could be Exaltwitch Academy Season 2, and yet we will have possibly by then been able to convert the game from Exalted 3rd Edition to Exalted Essence. Or we may run a different Exalted, like a different Exalted campaign, but set in the same continuum as Academy. So the story that we started in Academy will continue, but with different PCs. That's if we decide not to convert the game, or if the players really get excited about playing other kinds of Exalted, because Essence is designed for more to be easier on multi-splat play, so you can mix types of Exalt casts. So that's kind of our plan, but we don't know what it is going to be yet because we haven't got a hold of Essence. Some of it is going to depend on when we get a hold of Essence. The Kickstarter has been announced, but it also takes time for us to read a book, practice the mechanics, work on our stream tech to make sure that it works properly. So there's a lot of questions still up in the air. And we're talking with Onyx Path about it as well. We'll see. They obviously have stuff that they got to pay attention to their own interests. So we'll see what they say, but it will be more Exalted coming up after Academy. Whether it's more Academy or different, but set in the same universe, we'll have to find that out soon, but we haven't found that out yet. Speaking of, tomorrow over at twitch.tv/Elizabeth A. Neal, they're going to be starting their playthrough of Mass Effect Legendary Edition. That's at 6 p.m. over at Elizabeth A. Neal's Twitch channel. On Saturday at 11 a.m. will be the rewatch of Exaltwitch Academy episode 18 at 11. All of these times are in Eastern Daylight Time, by the way. At 3 o'clock will be Drew Clue. At 5 o'clock will be Doomed with Scott, I assume. On Sunday is going to be Book Club. At I think 1 p.m. It's either noon or 1 p.m. over on Elizabeth's channel, where they'll be talking about The Wicked and the Divine, Volume 4, I believe. And then at 6 p.m. on Sunday will be Exaltwitch Academy episode 19. So hopefully you'll be able to come in for that. You can always just hop on our Discord to find out more. The link is below. And otherwise, look, it is not a perfect solution, but it is the best solution I can give you right now. If you can, if at all possible, if you're experiencing an issue in your game, use your word hole. We'll see you next time.